there, Bob from Oregon's Constant Gardener. Welcome to the OCG Fam Show to you, my YouTube buddies. What's going on? Let me know in the comments. It's the podcast. We've been talking about doing a podcast for a long, and we're finally doing it. We got a great guest, Mike from Full On. Mike, what's going on?
How you doing, Bob?
I got some Full On right here. So, I guess we'll just, I've never done one of these before. I'm not sure exactly what we're doing, but just, why don't you tell us a little about yourself to get started?
My name is Mike Dial. I've been in agriculture pretty much all my life, born on a farm. I owned multiple hydroponic stores and had a corporation, Innovative Growing Solutions. Came up with this biostimulant with my business partner about 7 years ago, and that's about it.
Were you looking to make Full On, or did it kind of find you?
Well, my business was Innovative Growing Solutions, and I was formulating nutrients. And Rob Christensen came to me with a product that he was trying to develop, and I kind of worked out the kinks and did some experimenting with it, and stumbled upon what we believe is a superior product for the market, and we released it, started Grow Switch, and been running with it ever since.
So would you say your product is a nutrient, or would you say that this is something slightly different than that? Is that, how would you classify what you got with Full On?
It's a biostimulant. It's a catalyst between nutrient, NPK based nutrients. It works as a transporter.
Okay.
Because nanotechnology, it helps carry nutrients through the cells with ease.
So what's your background? How did you get, back in the day, how did you get started?
I grew up on a farm. I hated it. I thought it was very backwoods, and became a contractor. In my early 20s, I realized that I missed the farm, got back into agriculture, and got into food development. I used to have imported nutrient NFT, nutrient film technique troughs that I was selling. And I realized that there was only salts being used, so I started experimenting. I'm pretty much a kitchen chemist. So I've never learned anything from growing plants without problems. I only learned from killing plants, and from that I gained knowledge that's very valuable.
Find the edge by crossing over it.
Yeah, exactly.
So when you didn't like farming to start, was it the farm life, or did you see inefficiencies and things that weren't right about it?
Farm life. My friends were surfing and having fun, and I had chores, and we grew our own food. And in the city, you could buy a box of frosted flakes with all kinds of sugars and good stuff, and I was eating oatmeal with molasses. So.
Little did you know, you were having the good stuff, and they were the ones that were.
Yeah, now looking back, I realized how smart my family was.
Oh, we lost you there for a second. Oh, there we go. No, you're back. So, when you went into contracting and stuff, and then what was it about the farming thing that brought you back? I mean, were you thinking you just go back to the farm, or were you more of a scientific approach to it, or what was that like?
I was in a relationship. I had pretty much a $500,000 greenhouse in my backyard. When I'd get home from work, I would have to go out and defragment for a couple hours out there. And the person in a relationship, she told me, why don't you stop doing what you hate and start doing what you love? And I told her, you don't know about economics. I pay the bills, this and that. And after a couple of stressful jobs that I'd been working on, I realized one day driving back that she was right.
Wow.
So I turned over all the contracts. Everybody thought I was dying or something because I was walking away from everything. But that was it. I pretty much got back into farming, growing food, and back then hydroponics was a big, people weren't doing it. So it was,
it was a specialized kind of weird thing, something you hear about but don't see it.
Everybody thought of it for growing marijuana is what the bottom line.
I gotcha.
Nobody looked at it as a way for people in arid areas where there wasn't a lot of water to be able to grow leafy tissues efficiently and so on and so forth. So that was kind of my thing, getting into building greenhouses and setting up hydroponic greenhouses for food production.
Are we talking lettuce and tomatoes, or what kind of crops?
Yeah, lettuce, tomato, cucumbers, you name it. The leafy tissue is the biggest thing. Basils, lettuces, and so on. So,
and those are the things that are hard to grow. Well, you talking like Arizona, the east of LA, all out in there, those kind of areas where you just can't grow that sort of thing.
Exactly. And I was in San Diego.
Oh, okay.
So it was the same thing, the water restrictions down here. So everything was being imported from Mexico or other areas. So the food miles that the food was having to travel was thousands of miles to get a head of lettuce, and it just didn't make sense to me when we could set up these local farms, keep money within the community, help build community, and that was pretty much the magic of it.
So I would assume that in San Diego you could grow a garden outside and grow your leafy vegetables just fine. It's just that you'd use a ton of water that they were unwilling to let you use because of the lack of it.
The cost it inhibits it.
I got you.
You're trying to compete in a market where people are growing with very cheap water rates compared to here.
Sure.
It was feasible.
So when you were
you're pretty much with the leafy tissues, you're cutting out a lot of the pesticides. So when you're in a controlled environment like a greenhouse, you're 3 feet off the ground in an NFT channel, you're able to efficiently grow thousands and thousands of heads of lettuce without the use of pesticides, without the water contamination going into the soils, building up nitrates and so on and so forth, going into our aquifer.
So when you started off doing, so you were working in contracting, you had this greenhouse because it was kind of a hobby, but it sounds like it was a pretty out of control hobby if you spent all that money on it.
Yeah.
Did you have commercial designs on doing this at some point from the start, or did it just kind of work its way into that?
No, I just started out with the 1100 Conway greenhouse, and little by little bolted on all the bells and whistles, and it's like building cars. You kind of get into a hot rod, and next thing you know, you're pouring your life savings into it without why.
So, how did that go when well, let me ask you this, because I want to take a little bit of a detour, because this is something I've always been interested in. It feels like the universe, although it is indifferent, still tries to make us do the things we are bad at, or the things that we don't enjoy. How did you get moved into contracting, and what was that like? Did you enjoy it at first, or was it a circumstance thing that brought you to that? What was the story with that?
Yeah, the contracting was just, back in the 70s, it was a good way to make a lot of money.
Sure, it was good money.
So getting a contractor license, start building was economics. So I looked at it truly as economics. I looked at farming as a lot of hard labor for a very small economic gain, and it just didn't make sense to me.
Did you ever enjoy the contracting?
Yeah, at the very beginning, when I was a young guy, and I was building, and I was doing. My businesses have all been innovative. So my first one was innovative designs, where I was designing, doing blueprints, architectural. So it was, it was very fulfilling building. I was very much into it as a young man.
So what happened with that then? I mean, as the business got bigger, it got to be more business stuff, or what happened that made it go south for you, where you no longer enjoyed it?
It's just like any gold rush. After a while, everybody and their brother are coming into it. The market's flooded. It becomes very competitive. The profit margins that you were used to disappear, and you're now competing with 20 bids instead of two, and it just, just like anything, just agriculture is the same way.
Yeah.
If you start farming, you start growing any crop, and somebody else sees that you're making money from that crop, next thing you know, you've got neighbors that are growing the same crop, and the prices plummet, and it becomes very competitive.
Do you think why is that? I mean, obviously it's because of human nature and capitalism and a competitive thing, but it seems like when you try to control that, like in a socialist market, it goes south that way too, because your supply and demand get us all out of whack. Are we just as a species doomed to go bust and boom?
Sometimes I wonder.
Uh-huh.
It is, it's just the nature of the beast. When you have a gold rush, somebody finds a chunk of gold on the side of a river, and next thing you know, the river's been exploited and the mountainsides have been blown up, and it went from being a guy with a panning some gold to being heavy equipment with dynamite and destroying the environment to harvest the resources. Yeah. It's the same thing in agriculture and construction, whatever it may be. It is kind of the nature of the beast. We do instead of what we tried to do at the end of Innovative Growing Solutions was set up communities where farmers could complement each other, so they weren't competing with like plant tissue, so that they could come to the market with a bouquet of products without directly over flooding and driving prices down in the battle of competition of trying to get the dollar out of a certain product. So, but it takes community. It's the same with any form of agriculture, any form of business and stuff. It's a hydroponic store that's selling goods. They can become very competitive in a very unhealthy way for the owners or the customers, so on and so forth. You start driving prices down, you start losing customer service because you just don't have the economic wherewithal to be able to provide that anymore.
You can't do all the things you used to.
It's the Walmart mentality of selling goods.
Do you think, I guess, as far as you mentioned the word community, I think with the internet, we've got more community than we've ever had because we can all communicate peer-to-peer in a way that we never could before. Do you think that things are getting better or worse, or that we're in a transition, or what do you think about that?
I'm hopeful. I'm very hopeful. I mean, for the first time, we have this little device I carry in the pocket that I can have access to all the knowledge of mankind within a moment. Now, whether I use that to look at people pouring hot water on themselves, or eating Tide Pods, or if I actually use it for the knowledge, and then utilize that knowledge more than just read it, put it into action, and that's a big part of where we're at right now. The transition is how do we effectively use all this knowledge that's at our fingertips. They're in the pocket. We could pull it out at any time and research, anything.
Well, I read something about that when they first started using electric motors in industrial applications, that basically there used to be this plant that had this big steam or whatever engine in the middle of the plant, and there was a big drive line that went up through a whole 5-6 story plant with belts that ran all the separate little machines, all the machining stuff. And that when they got the electric motor, they just put it in the place of the steam motor or the gas motor, whatever it was. But as time went on, they realized, well, we can put little electric motors on each little thing. And when they did that, they're like, well, we can take this plant and make it a big flat plant and not have to have elevators and all that. And so the efficiencies came after they found the technology and used it for a while. Does that make sense at all? I guess what I'm saying is how does that, you think, do you have any insight into how that might work with this as far as how we take, I don't think we've figured out what to do with this thing yet. Do you think we're getting there, and what do you think? How do you think that will go?
Well, I think you had a good analogy there. You have, in the old days, you had one steam engine that ran all kinds of devices. I guarantee you that General Electric and everybody that was making electric motors was looking at it as a form of selling electricity. It all came down to fossil fuels.
Sure.
The more you could sell, that's how it all gets out of control.
Mm-hmm.
That little steam engine that controlled 50 different devices was a very economic and sustainable method of running 50 devices instead of having 50 electric motors, so on and so forth. So it's there's a lot to say about the simplicity of the past and how we take today's technology with that sustainable methodology that was used in the past.
So you don't think maybe the electric motor was necessarily an innovation then, as far as that particular analogy that we just had there?
No, not really.
Huh.
No, really. Because now we have nuclear plants to provide the electricity for all the extra motors. And we start damming up every river that used to be a wild river that went into floodplains that would leave the topsoils for our farmland and so on and so forth. So now our farmland's all depleted. We're dumping synthetic salts in there. And back in the day when that steam engine was pumping away, we didn't have all those dams, and we didn't have to have hydroelectric on every river, and we didn't have to exploit every resource to be able to provide those massive motors, electric motors, and so forth.
Do you think solar ultimately fixes that?
I think solar's a big part of it. It's definitely a passive energy, but just like with anything, there's a balance to it. You start looking at lithium batteries, and you start looking at how that mining and the damage environmentally that's coming from that.
Sure.
You have to start to weigh it out. So, it's wind power, solar power. It's a combination of everything. If you live on a little river and you can throw a little water turbine out there with a ram pump, that's good energy. That's passive, sustainable, so on and so forth.
So as everything kind of distributes out and gets flatter, is what it seems like, where it's cutting out all these middlemen of all this thing. How does that affect agriculture and those sorts of industries? Do you think it just gets worse and worse?
Not really. I think that we're seeing more and more the youth going back to a simpler way. We're seeing regenerative farming becoming more and more a practice. And it's a good thing. For years, agriculture was nothing more than a way to sell fossil fuels. The plant nutrients, everything was derived from these fossil fuels. We went from a 6-inch plow to a 30-inch plow. We completely degraded the topsoils down to nothing. Up in the Central Valley of California, on the average, they're putting 3 to 4 times the amount of nitrates in the soil that they're harvesting in plant tissue out of the ground. So,
where's that going? Is it just going into it's just pouring through the ground?
Aquifers. It goes into our aquifers, and all the little communities up there that they can't even bathe with the water that's being pumped to them because their skin will blister. There's so much nitrate in there. Nobody on the media covers it, but it's a crazy thing.
So is that a lack of microbial life in the soil that would hold that stuff up there?
The microbial life's gone. It's completely been, destroyed by the use of pesticides, the synthetic salts, and the over-tilling. Every time you flip it over, you're exposing it to solar radiation, which for a microbial, it's death. Instant death.
So was there ever a gold rush in farming for the farmer? Or has it always been a tough life? I mean, Thoreau talked about it being a death or being a shackle
There's
deal.
gold rush coming all the time. All the time. Every time you go in and you see a goji berry or anything like that, that used to be an indigenous plant that grew in South America, and now it's a massive agricultural industry. The problem is, just like coffee and everything else, it gets exploited to the point that it starts doing more environmental damage than, the benefit to the farmer or anybody for that matter.
So, was farming ever done right? I mean, when was the golden age of sustainable farming? Was there ever?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we grew up in a time, when your grandparents, my grandparents, pretty much everybody had a little backyard garden.
Mm-hmm.
And all those fractional gardening created an abundance of food because you didn't have to go buy all your leafy tissue. You didn't have to buy your tomatoes, and you ate seasonally. That's a big part of the whole problem is we've got to the point that dead of winter, we want these tomatoes and stuff that are out of season. So now they're being shipped with all the fossil fuels for thousands of miles to get here. They're being grown in greenhouses in unnatural condition using lights and so on and so forth. And there's a lot to go into that perfect little round red tomato that's all food miles and everything that goes into it. It's really not sustainable. And if we continue, it could be the demise of our, our way of life. So yeah, absolutely. There was a time when we had small scale farms and we as a community, we bought local. We ate seasonal. We knew who our farmer was. We grow up in a time now where we know who our doctor and dentist and lawyer is, but we don't know who our farmer is, who provides the nutrients, the fundamental basic building blocks of life. We don't even know that aspect. It's gone. We drive by our local farm and we never stop in to meet the farmers that are local and more importantly, to support them. Find out what they're growing. Buy it from them. When you see it in the market and you have something that's grown in another country out of season and you have something that's local and seasonal, buy that. Have 3 times a day you can vote with your dollar and we could change everything. Every individual that has a wallet has the power 3 times a day to control agriculture. You don't have to support GMOs. You don't have to buy genetically modified organisms.
So, was there a point where there were no farms? I mean, obviously back, hunter-gatherer, but where it went from gardens to farms to where cities grew up and you had to start farming to where one person had to make a bunch of one thing. How did that go?
I mean, if we were to point at agriculture, we could say that agriculture is the demise of mankind. Because as soon as we stopped being hunters and gatherers and we started agriculture, we started villages and we started growing crops so that we didn't have to be moving in transit constantly to forage for foods and seasonally move with the seasons. And we set up camp and started shitting and pissing where we ate. Yeah, definitely creates a lot of problems. And people, there's whole books that are written about the demise of mankind and pointing at agriculture.
So we were on a path, as far as what you think, when we moved, when we decided we were going to stay somewhere for 6 months instead of staying there for 6 days.
Absolutely. We were hunter-gatherers for, millions of years. We've only been modern man for a fraction of a second of time, and it's falling apart very quickly.
So, do you think that ultimately we can fix this through technology and slightly modifying our behavior, or are we doomed to? So, because you're not suggesting that we got to go back to walk out in the woods and destroy things. What is the technology or the things that we can do where we can somewhat live in the same way we are now, but in a sustainable fashion?
Start growing what you can, where you can, with what you have. Share food, share seeds. that's a good remedy for most of our problems. Support local, whether it's local agriculture or local artisans, bakers, whatever it may be. We can change the world locally. We can't sit at home and think, oh, I'm going to change this problem and this problem.
Yeah.
It's just a daydream. But what you can do is locally you could make fractional changes. And these fractional changes will change the world for our children, our grandchildren, and so on. But it starts locally. It's each one of us not thinking we have to do these big changes for the world, but looking locally at fractional changes that we can do to help the environment, the community, so on and so forth.
So buying local to start with from someone local, and then ultimately them buying locally for what they make and producing more of what we do to create less transportation and create probably a more natural way of growing it over rows and rows.
Yeah, because now you're supporting a small family farm locally. That money is not going to go to a corporation that's out of state or out of country. It's going to go to a local resident that's now going to support the Boy Scouts or Girl Scouts or the softball teams or whatever, and that money stays within the community. So you're actually saving money in the long run economically.
Sure. Do you
More importantly, you're not supplying money to large factory farms that are raping and pillaging the earth to, supply a consumer nation of consumers. That's pretty much what we become.
What do you, as far as this, like your stuff, the full on and a lot of these other nutrients and things, it seems like that there's been kind of a revolution of growing more bountiful harvest in small quantities, if that makes any sense. What's going on with that as far as, because people tell me, well, you can't feed yourself off a garden that you can grow in your backyard. There's just no way. Is there a way? I mean, where are we going with that as far as like a full on, that, and there's many other things like that, but things where you can, on a small scale, grow a big harvest of a dense harvest of vitamins and nutrients and those sorts of things. What's going on with that?
Well, that's part of what full on is, if we look at a lot of the foods that are being grown on the factory farms, we're 85% lower in nutrients than we were 40 years ago. So we have all the documentation of what we were growing years ago, what the nutrient values were. And now we can look at what we're growing today, and we find that there's very little nutrient values to the tissue. So when we look at it, we think, okay, if I grow this tomato in my backyard, 80% higher in nutrients, well, 80%, that means I would have to eat 80 tomatoes to equal 1 tomato in my backyard. So, yeah, you can grow the nutrients right in your backyard as long as you're doing it right.
So it is the nutrients.
Nutrient-dense tissues.
Wow. So it's not the mass of what we're eating, it's the nutrient value of what we're eating. So
absolutely.
One more
visual, nothing more than a marketing ploy. When you look at that perfectly round red tomato, the genetically modified plant tissue, it literally has no value other than the aesthetic value of being a perfect red round circle that you can slice up and it'll fit perfectly on a sandwich, So
is this our bodies, when we eat more sugars, corn and sugar and things like that, and more processed food, is that our body responding to the lack of nutrition in the vegetables we're eating? Maybe.
Yeah, we've started to use it as a way of energy. If you're feeling low and everything, you can throw 5 teaspoons of sugar in your coffee and you'll get a little bit of a kick. But
so,
it's about as heavy as snorting a line of cocaine.
But if I decide I'm going to be a vegetarian and I go to the supermarket and I buy a bunch of vegetables that are low in nutrients, that's a difficult proposition to make it, isn't it?
Absolutely. That's why knowing your food and knowing your farmer is as important as eating the food. If you're just blindly taking for granted that some large corporation is providing you with a nutrient-dense tissue, you're going to be starving.
Wow.
You're not going to have a good time becoming a vegetarian.
So I'm here in Oregon and in Eugene, and I can drive 10 miles to the farm, and they got a farmer's market there, and I can buy everything wonderful like that. Well, what if I'm in South Dakota? And what can someone do that's not in a place that has that kind of environment where it's easy to get at those sorts of things?
Educate, find out where the closest source for the foods that you're using, and start to get into a habit of eating seasonal, so that you know that the foods that are grown in your neighboring states that are provided to you are seasonally grown, so that you're not contributing to the, buying the illusion of a red round tomato that has no value.
Wow.
So there's all kinds of networks out there. We've lived in Nebraska and stuff for decades and decades and decades. It's not until we came out with the supermarket. You can look back 40, 50 years at the first supermarket, and you can see the demise of our food system. We went from having where you would go to either your backyard, a neighbor, a family farm to get your produce, a baker to get your bread, a butcher to get your meat, to going into this one marble building that had everything. So what we've done is we're selling convenience. We're selling, so you can go one place, one part shopping. That gives you more time to work for the system and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
And it's kind of a flawed theory, if you ask me. But this is just my opinion.
Well, no, but
I'm just an old man. So.
But it seems like that life and not the universe, but the system has built up more friction, so that everything has become more difficult, so that you really don't have time to go to the butcher and the baker and the candlestick maker. You have to go to the supermarket. So
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We've been convinced, we're programmed. They interviewed, after the Depression, they interviewed the head superintendent of the school system. They're asking him, why is the curriculum structured this way? And he said, well, my job is to create a workforce to rebuild America. And that same thought process is still in our public schools today. That our children are being inoculated into the system to become part of a workforce. So not that we all shouldn't work and contribute, but it kind of takes away from, being self-sufficient, knowing how to knowing how to forge, knowing that the planet provides enough for everybody. It just doesn't provide enough for the greedy. But everything's there for all of us.
I've heard a lot about these evil people, but I haven't met too many of them. I guess I just wonder if that we've just kind of, as a society, gone astray. I mean, because we are the system on some level. I mean, there's an overarching, control over us that we have to fight against, I guess, in some way. But this thing is all. Do you have any feel for how this all happened? How it all went south? I mean, how did we as a people let this happen?
Well, it's, with all due respect, it's the foundation of a fascist society when we allow corporations to hijack our government, and now the illusion of government is, the puppeteers are actually these large corporations that have all the lobbyists and so on and so forth that pull the strings. And just like in this industry, your industry right now, there's a parasitic entity that has come into it, which is they're hiding their name now, Monsanto, but they're buying up everything. It's monopoly. You control. You don't want to sell out. Don't want to sell out to them. They'll buy up all your suppliers. They'll buy up everything it takes to make your formulation, and you'll have to sell to them.
Mm-hmm.
It's the muscling effect of large corporations is the problem.
Yeah.
That's why we try to keep, with our formulation, we're very stringent about making sure there's no GMOs. There's everything that we source besides the sea vegetables and the kelps
Mm-hmm.
are all, and even that's through an American company. So
Mm-hmm.
we're supporting everything that's derived from the United States and small businesses.
Mm-hmm.
So we go to great lengths to make sure that we're not contributing to the GMOs or anything like that.
So you would say the answer is to go as local as you can.
I think the answer to almost all of our problems is that.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the only way that we truly can change the problems of the world is to start locally by supporting local, becoming involved with your community, knowing who your neighbor. I mean, first, if you want to do anything, walk next door to the person you lived 30 years next to and you don't know their name and introduce yourself.
Wow.
Know their children. Know who your children play with.
Uh-huh.
I mean, these are the fundamental problems of having a overstressed work, grind of becoming part of a system where we don't even know our neighbors. We wonder why our children are getting involved with stuff when we don't even know who they're playing with. We have no idea.
Yeah. No.
And it's not because we have to go to great lengths. The sad thing is we just have to walk 30 feet or a country mile and knock on a door. Take a slice of pie with you, take a beer with you, anything like that, and just reach out to your community. Stop by that local shop that you look at and you see the mom and pop little shop. You don't know what it is, stop and find out. And hopefully find something that you can use and support so that they can continue to flourish, because these small businesses are the answers to all our problems.
Yeah. Wow. This was something else. I'm blown away. I'm glad we kind of talked a little bit, because I know it's easy just to talk about how to use full on to grow your plants bigger and stronger, but this was a fascinating conversation. I think does some good. So thanks for talking with me, and thanks for talking with us.
Thanks for listening, my friend.
Very cool.
Thanks for listening.
For more information about anything on today's show, go to our website, OCGFAM.com. And if you buy anything while you're there, use the code FAMSUMMER. It's going to save you 20%, and it's a lot of fun. The OCG Fam Show. It's pretty good. It happens every day. It's the OCG Fam Show. See you on Monday.